ready. Good morning.
Good morning.
If you have your Bibles or your lesson book, we're going to be changing direction starting this quarter. We're going to go out of the New Testament, we're going to go back to the Old Testament for a while. You know, we've been studying James, and James, the study of James has taught us how we should think and the kind of wisdom we should seek. Well, today we're going to look at an incident. It's called biased love. If I was to ask you this question, what is the difference? How would you define the difference between a house and a home? You know, you don't go so well, sweet house, do you? Like to do sweet home, do you? Well, you know, our writer, and I have to agree somewhat with what he said, a house is just a structure.
Correct.
It's just a structure. When you get ready to buy a house, you don't say, let's go out and buy a home, do we? We say, let's go look at houses. We're going to buy a house. Well, a house is just a place where people dwell. Okay? And that's all it is. Then what makes a house different from a home? Well, the writer says a home consists of all those within the structure that makes up the memories and the struggles that we have in our families. In other words, a home is the relationship that knits a family together. And that knitting is through memories, struggles, problems we have, illnesses that we have. So this is what home is. And I can honestly say in my life, I consider when I was growing up, I had two homes. I had two homes. My grandparents, because they practically raised me, because during the war, my parents had to be off in the defense work for the government. But when the war was over, my home was with my parents. So a home then is what we make of the memories and things that we have. Now, we're going to study today about a family. And before I do, I want to give a little bit of background. It all started following a dispute between brothers. Now, let's go back. Let's just stop right there. Because I realize what you see on the screen, but I want to go back a step. Because we're talking about what caused this struggle. If you go back, the grandfather of Jacob was who? Isaac, wasn't it? Okay, Isaac and Rebekah had two sons, Esau and Jacob. And remember that story that Jacob came out with the holding on to the heel of Esau? Well, you know there's an old saying, like father, like son, like mommy, like child. In other words, a home, in the case of Isaac and Rebekah, was no good. Why? There was favoritism from the very beginning of birth. Why? Isaac did what? He favored Esau. Rebekah favored Jacob. Now, the reason I'm telling you this story is because you can see how it's going to fit into our story today. How we are affected in our relationships with our parents, those around us. So it was jealousy right from the very beginning between these two sons. They were pulled apart. Now, I ask you a question. I don't know how many children you all had. I had 4. And I can honestly say as a parent, and I say this with all the love in my heart, I love all of my children the same. But, and I think every parent, if he is honest with himself, there are times when you favor one over the other. Maybe it's because of the way they act, or maybe it's because of their practice. But there's times when children can feel that mommy or daddy is favoring the brother. When me and my brother was growing up, if we wanted attention, it was simple to get attention from mom. Just go up to mom and say, Mom, you love Donnie better than you do me. Well, Mom would always take me in her arms. They'll say, that's not true. But Dad, on the other hand, fathers, has a little bit more stern effect. Dad would always say, well, if you think that, go ahead and think it. But it ain't true. But we see this in the story here, that what happened between these two families is this. Rebekah gets Jacob to flee from Esau because she's afraid that Esau is going to kill him. So he flees. They separate. Esau raises his family. Jacob raises his family. Now we're going to get into today's lesson. And this is what we want to find. We're going to start with verse 2 of Genesis 37. It says, this is the account of Jacob's family line. In other words, this is the genealogy of Jacob, okay? And that genealogy goes back, as I said, we're going to start, we look back to, go clear back to Abraham. But this particular, what we're looking at is from Isaac and Rebekah. Because this is where the trouble starts, is with the grandparents. Joseph is the 10th son of Jacob and Rachel. He's the 10th son. Now, Benjamin is not born yet, which makes the 11th son. But they have a daughter also. Okay? I'll take that back. Joseph is the 11th son. Okay? 10th son, the girl was 11, Benjamin was the 12th child by Jacob and Rachel. Now, a young man of 17 years old. It's believed that Jacob was probably around 90 or 91 years old when he and Rachel had Joseph. And if you go back and you study Genesis 35, 36, 34, you can see the lineage of how all this takes place, how Jacob, what did he do? He had to work what? 7 years thought he was going to get Rachel, didn't he? But who did he wind up with? Leah, didn't he? So, Leah and Rachel and two concubines or maidservants, which is referred to as his wives also, have 12 sons, don't they? Which becomes the 12 tribes. And he says that at 17 years old, Joseph was tending the flock with his brothers. Now, the sons of Bilhah, and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. Now, those two girls, those two women are the maidservants of Leah and Rachel. His father's wife, and he brought their fathers a bad report. You know, I had, like I said, 4 children. Now, I look at Joseph's life. Now, I know he was a great man. But I look at Joseph's wife based upon his family, and to me, I think Joseph's a little bit of a tattletale. I really do. I think Joseph got the pleasure out of getting his brothers in trouble. I really do. Because it says that Joseph went to his dad all the time, give dad bad reports about his brothers. Well, I had one of my children the same way. She would love to get a fight started. And the next thing you see, she'd be off in the corner by herself, just a laughing away. Well, I look at Joseph, even though he was a great man and he was a shadow of Christ, I still think when he was a young, and you know, God don't tell each one of us how to run our lives. He gives us a free moral agent. We're free moral agents. Well, Joseph wasn't told by God to do this, but God has a way of doing things with his infinite wisdom. He takes this little tattletale of Joseph and he uses that for Joseph later on down the road. And we see how this happens. So I think Joseph got a little bit of kick out of getting his brothers in trouble. Because Joseph, as I said before, it all started with his grandparents. Joseph now is considered what? The favorite of all his brothers, even his son. He was considered by Jacob, he was the favorite. You see, the key here is this. If you go back to the grandparents, Esau was the man's favorite. Okay? And the mommy's favorite now becomes the favorite grandchild of his daddy. So you see how this favoritism has twinkled down the line? You see how Jacob deceived his brother Esau along with his mother. So we see then this taking place. We see this from the fact that in verse 3 it says, now Israel, that's Jacob, his name was changed later. Remember that story when he wrestled with the man or the angel? And due to the struggle, then they called him Israel. Loved Joseph, the youngest one now at the time, loved Joseph more than his other sons. Now, remember what I said earlier about that kids can sense things that happen? Can you imagine what it was like to see a son that was pampered by his father all the time? And he's sitting there just sniggering all the time, right on his daddy's lap, saying, I got the one now, I'll get you. I can just see Joseph just sitting there with his daddy. And then he says, because he had been born when? At an old age. But that's one part of it. If you remember the story, Rachel was his first lover. That was his soulmate. And they hadn't had any children until around 90 years old, 91 years old, and along comes Joseph. So he becomes Jacob's favorite. Because he was also born when he was old. And I also believe because he was born from his first love. But here's the thing that I was talking about, that children can sense favoritism. What did Joseph do? He makes a robe of many colors. Ornate robe or many colors. Who for? He didn't make one for each one of the children, did he? He made it for who? Joseph. Can you see Joseph putting that robe on like this and just going right out and go right along the front? Look what the old man Daddy gave me. Look what Daddy gave me. You know he's doing what? He's lighting a kindle fire. That old jealousy, he's just getting ready to start it to blaze. And then we see in verse 4, we see this. When his brothers saw that their father loved Joseph more, then they hated Joseph and could not speak a kind word to him. Can you imagine even, like I said, I only had one brother. But I've seen big families, in my own family, that where children just despise each other. I can imagine, as I studied this lesson, and you know, I don't say this to be sacrilegious in any way. But Joseph's personality, I believe in his attitude as a child, caused a lot of the tension among the whole family. Even though he becomes what we consider a shadow of Christ that saves Israel, like I said earlier, God don't tell us, don't stand in our way, but he does take things that we do and he applies them to his plan. So here we see that the boys all hate him. They don't want to have nothing to do with him. But look what happens. Joseph still kindles a fire. He's still making that old jealousy go right on. And then he comes up to verse 5 and says, Joseph had a dream. Joseph means dreamer. Joseph has a dream. Now, I can still just see the boys. Why would I want to hear a dream from my brother that I hate? He has nothing to tell me that I won't even know about. But yet Joseph, when he told his brothers the dream, it made them hate him all the more. Why? Why was it about the dream? It wasn't the dream just because it was a dream. It was a certain dream. Why did it make them hate him more? They hated him already because he'd already been flaunting that big fancy coat of his. He's already been bragging about how he is accepted by his father. Now he's going a little bit further. Now he's going to put some more kindling on that fire. He's going to make sure that flame gets higher. So what does he do? He goes up to his brothers. He says, "Hey, I had a dream." And they said, "We don't want to hear your dream." But anyway, he goes ahead and he says this. My thing's not working right. He says this to them. He said to them, "Listen to this dream that I had last night. I had a dream. I want to tell you about my dream now. You want to listen to it?" I can just picture now. I can picture in my own mind. This is me. As they're out there, the other boys just walking away. And old Joseph right behind them. "Hold up. I want to tell you about this dream I got." Joseph knows what the dream is about. He knows exactly what it's about. Instead of keeping it to himself, he wants his brothers to know it. So he tells them, "Hold up, I want to tell you about my dream." So he goes ahead. The verse says, "We were all out binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to him." Now, as I said, I can just see these boys walking down through here. And Joseph said, "Hold on, I'm going to tell you my dream." Now it stops. These boys hear what Joseph is saying. Their anger is getting more and more. More jealousy arises. More jealousy. He said, "Hold on now." And they gather around me. "You all bow down to me." That's what he's telling them. He said, "I stood up in front of you all. You all actually went to your knees and bowed to me." Joseph knew what he was saying. But the boys didn't want to hear nothing about it. So what happens next? We see his brother said to him, "Do you intend to reign over us?" That's a good question to ask, wasn't it? Why would anybody bow down to somebody? You don't bow down to somebody unless you give homage to them and you acknowledge that they are supreme to you. They're asking Joseph, "Do you think that you're going to reign over us? You're going to reign over us? Will you actually rule us?" That's the second question. If you reign over me, you're going to rule me. That's the idea. Joseph knew what he was saying. That little twinges about it, just kneeling them, just enough to get them to start it. Getting that flame going. God's listening all the time. And God's going to use this very thing, this jealousy. And he's going to use this little tattletale boy, I believe. And he's going to use this, and he's going to use it for a great thing to come. Going to be a great revelation. Because he's going to use this little tattletale Joseph for the good. Then he says in verse 9, then he had another dream. Oh, just a minute. It's not just one he's already. Now he's had another dream. God's given him another dream. Instead of being a little bit set back, he said, I'm not going to cause any more. I've already caused enough trouble. I'll just keep this one to that. No. I want to go ahead and do a little bit more punching. So what does he do? He told it to his brother. Listen, he said, I have another dream. And this time, listen what he says this time. The sun and the moon, they bow down to me. Now notice in the other verse, he said that you all bow down to me. Now he's saying the sun and the moon. Well, who does he mean by the sun and the moon? He means his father and his mother. He said, they bow down, and the 11 stars, which represented the other 11 boys, they also bowed down. He said, look here, you all are going to be bowing down in front of me. Oh, can you imagine here 11 jealous people, boys, hating, a little tattletale, cannot stand him, despises him. Now let's go back forward. Why did Rachel have Jacob to leave? Because she was afraid of what? Esau was going to kill him, didn't he? Now let's see how God keeps using this incident in this family's life. Then he says, he goes on into verse 10. When he told his father, so now Joseph goes and tells his father this dream now. As well as his brothers, his father rebuked him. Called him out, didn't he? And he said, what is this dream you had? In other words, Jacob's wanting Joseph now to interpret that dream to him. He's got an idea of what it's about. But he's wanting his son to tell him what it's about. And he said, what about this dream? And then he said, will your mother and I and your brothers actually come to bow down to the ground before you? Now keep in mind, Jacob's the patriarch. Jacob is the head of the family. What he said that, Jacob said stone him right then, and they could have stoned him. And he'd have been all right by God. But he's Jacob's favorite. He's his only son at this time. So Jacob is asking him, do you really believe that these dreams that you're having, that I and your mother and your brothers, now notice there's one left out of this picture. That's the sister. She's not mentioned in this story. Are we going to bow down to you? Are we going to give homage to you? Are we going to look up to you as a ruler? Well, God's taking every bit of this thing. It's playing right into God's hands. Right into his plan. Because what? Because what happened with Isaac and Rebekah. Now it's come down to Jacob and Rachel. The jealousy, the favoritism among the kids is starting to come to a head. And then all of that, on top of that, there's one little tattletale in the family. It's our kindling the fire all the time. Then we see then in verse 11. His brothers were so jealous of him, but his father, look here, his father kept this matter in mind. Jacob keeps all of this in the back of his mind because he doesn't understand yet that there's something bothering Jacob. So he keeps these two dreams that he has in the back of his mind. Now we learn later, if we not in this lesson, as I go on, Joseph has a third dream. That really what sets everything apart. But then we see then in verse 23, we're going to skip now to verse 23. He says, so when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe of many colors that he was wearing. Now, if you learn between this here, you see that the boys, all the other boys are out taking care of the sheep and the goats. Well, Jacob sends Joseph to them to check on them. It's working right in the God's plans, ain't it? So they hate him. Now they're away from home. Nobody can see them. They're right out in the desert. So Joseph then goes, and what do? They strip him of that robe. Because that robe is what started the whole thing. Well, not started, but that's one of the things that really started to light the fire of jealousy. So they take that robe off of him. And I can just see these brothers as they're standing around. Now, what are we going to do with Joseph? There was even talk about killing him, wasn't there? But who put a stop to that? Reuben, wasn't it? The oldest brother. He said, no, so we don't want to do that. But what they did do this. And they took him and they threw him in a cistern. They took the coat off of him. They threw him down in that cistern. I believe, this is just me now, the Bible doesn't say it. You know, you've heard me say it. Where the Bible speaks, we speak. But we have the right to places that we can have our own opinions. I believe their intention when they threw him down in that cistern was to let him die of starvation. But it didn't happen. God didn't have that kind of plan, did he? God had another way it comes. So finally, we find then in verse 30, when the Mennonite merchants came by. Now this is an interesting verse right here. And I want to point out a few things in it. His brother pulled Joseph up out of the cistern because what? They found a way now that they could not kill him, but they could get him out of their hair. And they sold him for 20 shekels of silver. Now we have no idea. The Bible doesn't tell what 20 shekels was or anything like that. But look what it says. Shekels to the Ishmaelites. Now notice the Mennonites were on speaking terms with Israel, with these boys. But Ishmaelites were enemies. So the Mennonites are the go-between that God uses to get Joseph sold off to the Mennonites, or to the Ishmaelites. And then it says the Ishmaelites took him all the way to Egypt. And we find them now that when they take him to Egypt, here's the little tattletale now. On his way, he's away from his daddy and his family. And I can just see him, 17-year-old kid. The reason I said that is this. I can remember when I was a young man. I was put, when I went to the Army, I was in Panama. during JFK's presidency, about ready to get my discharge. And the president slapped a 6-month extension on every one of us because of the Bay of Pigs. I related myself with Joseph a little bit in this story, because here I am in a faraway country, nobody knows me. I'm away from my family. I'm scared. I don't know what to do. I don't know where to turn. And you know, I guess some of my best prayers, honest prayers, was at that time. I can relate to Joseph. Here he is, he's sold off. He's a favorite. Now he's separated from his family. Now, I also, as I study this, come to me this. What it's going to be like to be outside of Christ. To be separated from Father himself. What an awful feeling that's going to be. And Joseph is being carried away as a slave. And not only as a slave, but he is going to be sold again. So we find then in this story, today's tragic episode impresses us on us about the favoritism that can and has been done in many families. We see it every day, don't we? I see families that show favoritism to children. How do I say that? You see families with boys and girls. Boys become athletes. The whole life is around that boy. The girls, as the old saying, get the crumbs. Or vice versa. It could be a girl that's an athlete. And the boy is a bookworm, as we call him. But we see favoritism in families today. It's not something that's new. But if God can use a little tattletale like Joseph to bring forth a great revelation, how can he not do the same thing in our families? I think so. And then we see this. Still God's sovereignty, plan, and purpose move forward under his guiding hand. God is never dwarfed by the evil intentions of human beings. He wasn't held back because of what? The evil intentions of Joseph's family wasn't. He used that. He used that for something to bring about better. God remains the unseen mover in our lives just as he did Joseph's life. I look back at my life. I did things in my life that I'm not proud of. I had to answer for those. I had to be punished. But I think God used those things, not that he wanted me to do them now, but he, being divine as he is, he used those to bring me closer to him. This brings Joseph, I think, closer to God. Joseph now has to change his whole style. He depended on who? His father. Now he's got to look to a father that's even higher than Jacob. And that is God. And then in our conclusion, God's love favors all his children. His love is no greater to me than it is to you. No greater to you than it is to Chris or them. It's hard, as I said. God's love is the same for everybody. But I believe God at times uses us over other people, not to show favoritism, but to do the work for the Lord. So, if we learn anything in our lesson, let's look back to the book of James. Because this lesson fits right into what James said, what favoritism is not a wisdom from God, but is what? Wisdom of the world. It's an earthly wisdom. Even though Joseph, I felt like, was Jacob's favorite, I believe he was, as I said, I believe he was a little tattletale. I think his personality and everything was one that he liked to get people in trouble. But God used that to bring back a revelation down the line. God bless you. Thank you so much.